Hi there, I'm Tom Spencer. This week on Central Texas Gardener, find out how to grow fruiting and ornamental trees, including olives. On tour, see how gardeners ripped up their dead lawn for a new perspective. Daphne explains how to protect young trees from critters, and John Dromgoole shows how to grow food in containers. So let's get growing right here, right now.
Support for Central Texas Gardener comes from GeoGrowers, offering custom soil blends for lawns, gardens, xeriscaping, and organic landscaping supplies. More information at geogrowers.net.
What do you do when you lose your lawn? See how these gardeners made the transition from grass to garden.
Lana and Bob Beyer changed their garden perspective when harsh weather intervened. They reduced their lawn, replacing dead St. Augustine with minimal sections of buffalo grass, pathways, and water-wise plants that attract wildlife. The process actually began when they moved to Austin from Houston in 2006.
I was a big plant collector, and I thought I could bring all those wonderful plants that grow so well in Houston to Austin, and I ended up losing about half of them, and I realized, well, this isn't Houston. So I had to make some adjustments and start learning about plants that are unique to this very tough environment that we have in Central Texas.
We laid out by groupings of plants because he was essentially a collector still. And said, well, it has to have some continuity, some plan to it. So that was the genesis of really designing, and I learned a great deal about how to design landscaping.
One of their original projects was a bed for succulents. Since then, Bob's learned which ones can take deep freezes, but all withstand drought. The former owners' raised vegetable beds were ideal for succulents that need good drainage, but the soil was not.
One thing about the cactus bed is the soil was so rich because it was organically amended for vegetable gardening. I had to dummy down that soil tremendously, put a lot of decomposed granite in it because most cacti and succulents like mineral elements, not organic elements, to grow effectively. Plus they need the excellent drainage as well.
But his ultimate revelation was incited by other plants that survived seasons of extreme weather.
I was still resistant to growing native and adaptive plants. I just still wanted to look for those collector plants, those really unusual things that nobody else had, you know, just the thrill of finding something unique. And then I came to realize that even that's not going to work because some of those plants aren't truly adaptive. So I finally bit the bullet and really started learning about what is truly native and adaptive and the reasons why they survive so much better than other plants, and I've become a convert.
Yes, if he had any little doubt left, last summer did it.
Summer 2011 fried their central lawn. In winter 2012, Bob used a weed eater to scalp the remains. He piled up the refuse to decompose for natural fertilizer. Then he and Lana got creative.
I think having an actual paper plan on paper, like I say, we did it with erasers and pencils, but having an overall plan, I think it helps develop an appreciation for how things will look without having to make all the mistakes of putting them all in and then saying, well, this isn't working, we got to do it over again.
Walkways embroider mulched beds. They chose river rock and flagstones for the paths.
I didn't like decomposed granite for the reason that it gets caught in the shoes and gets tracked all over the place. It's too much the same color. And by using river rock, there's a little bit more variety of the color. It's a gentler look, I would call it, a gentler look. I thought that the decomposed granite looked rather sterile.
We enjoy the variance in color. And the size of the rock is important too. We're using 5/8 inch river rock, which we think is just about the right size. If it were any larger, it would be hard to walk on. If it were any smaller, it would be flying everywhere.
A dry stream bed meanders the raised beds.
During heavy rains, the water tends to congregate along that wall, and that's the natural flow pattern, so that was the ideal place to put a dry riverbed.
Lana built a little cave for the imaginary spring's entrance.
And then I said, well, if it's a dry riverbed, it's going to have stuff in it. So we have to have different kinds of rocks that would have fallen.
Pieces
and
of wood, make it look
pieces of
natural.
wood,
Yeah.
things. It's going to have stuff in it to differentiate it from the walkways.
In the center, they modified their design to include buffalo grass left over from the front yard's makeover.
I called that the Lana Beyer Memorial Grass Patch. But this was just enough. It gives it a splash of green in the middle, which is a very comforting thing.
Lana gave it standout attention with a wood-mounted bird bath, a clamshell she bought for 50 cents years ago.
So between the combination of the brownish mulch, the green center piece, and the white rock, I think that's a nice blend of colors.
In the mulched areas, they gave their new plants plenty of space to grow. Their design revolves around cohesive diversity.
Well, one of the things I said, because it was starting to get too symmetrical, and I said, well, how do we break up that symmetry? If we have this plant here, we have a matching one over here. I said, no, we're going to have those together over here, and we'll have something quite different over there. Different color, different texture, completely different plants. So that broke up that overriding symmetry without ruining the overall design.
I want each plant to stand out and show off on its own. We don't want to create a jungle. Yes, we've planted a lot of perennials, but we made our criteria simply that we don't want them to be more than 2 to 3 feet tall, 2 to 3 feet spread, and we planted them far enough apart where you can actually walk in amongst the mulch area and enjoy the individual plants.
And give them room to grow.
all, yeah, give them room to grow rather than have them all meshed together. We also we're trying to incorporate plants that will bloom at different times of the year. We also looked at the foliage texture, because a lot of times plants are, they go through dormancy periods between flowering cycles. And we also were concerned with having a variety of color. The attraction of wildlife. We have seen so many more butterflies and birds come to our yard since we've made this changeover.
The patio deck is a refreshing spot for outdoor entertaining. In their new design, they considered all perspectives.
I had discovered a long time ago that what might look good from 3 feet away, when you get 20 or so feet away, doesn't look so good anymore. And I had even run into an experience when we were doing this. I had this brilliant idea, I thought, and I set up something, and it looked really great up close. And when I stood up on the deck, I said, no, that doesn't look good at all. So getting that distance perspective, it was really important.
In front, they reduced their lawn to just 25%, required by their HOA. Bob got to feed his collector's soul with plants that are far more striking than plain lawn. Lana's wine glass design also pulls a street-side viewer directly into the garden. With leftover bricks from the home's construction, they added another tier to the existing raised beds.
It gives us an additional level of interest. It looks like it's always been there.
And then I got the idea of flowing a dry riverbed around the outside of it. We have a downspout where all the rain water comes down, and it was just a natural to flow the rainwater around that with the dry riverbed. Now, have we had to make changes along the way? Yes. I mean, we made minor changes, but what we do is we do it one step at a time, and like Lana mentioned earlier, take a step back, look at it, analyze it, say, is this really what we want? And if it is, fine, go ahead. If not, come up with an alternative.
This was a learning experience for the two of us, and it was very much a shared effort.
Absolutely.
With my knowledge of design and his knowledge of plants, it made a good team. It's much more inviting now, much more inviting.
Thanks for sharing your garden with us. And now we're going to be turning our attention to some wonderful edible plants or edible fruits that we can be growing in our gardens. I'm joined by Amanda Moon from It's About Thyme. And Amanda, this is a hot topic right now. Everybody wants to grow edibles.
Absolutely. There's been a trend that has been developing over the last couple of years where people are trying to get back to the basics.
Right.
And if our water is going to be such a scarce resource, why not put it towards something that then we can reuse?
Right. Well, you have these wonderful fruit trees that you've brought, And we're going to start by talking about some things that a few years ago nobody ever talked about growing in Texas. These are the olives.
Absolutely.
And I'm very excited about the olive industry generally in Austin and Central Texas, but also just for gardening plants. These are beautiful, really beautiful trees, aren't they?
They're stunning. Just the difference in texture and color that we get from normal fruit trees is so nice.
Yeah. Well, we have 3 different kinds of olive we're going to be talking about. We're going to start with the one that has probably become the backbone of the olive industry in Texas. That's
Absolutely.
Mission olive. And let's talk a little bit about the kind of cultural requirements and what people can expect in the way of fruit here.
Well, the Mission olive, which was first brought over to America, to California, has made its way to Texas, and they started growing it in the mid-1990s and thought, certainly we've got the right climate here to be able to produce olives. And the Mission olive is the one that they started with. It's proving to have the most cold hardiness, loves the drought, loves the heat, is fairly shallow rooted, so we can get away with growing it even in our rocky soil.
Sure.
It's got some deer resistance to it as well.
All right, some deer resistance,
Well, I mean,
carefully noted.
You've got to be careful because
Right.
anything that you plant from a nursery is going to have been heavily fertilized and heavily watered. And so you've got to let that shake out before it becomes more or less palatable to the deer.
I see. Okay. And these are plants that do bear the fruit.
Absolutely.
And, you know, a lot of times with fruit trees, it requires multiple trees, et cetera.
The
Is that
Mission
the
is
case?
actually self-pollinating.
Self-pollinated,
It's
good
a
to
little
know.
bit slower to produce than some other varieties of olives. Roughly 5 to 7 years, you'll start to see production.
Okay.
It's got a fairly quick growth rate to it. And what was wonderful is the 2 years that we've had recently where we got into the single and the low teens as far as temperatures, these survived with barely a dent.
Ah.
And yet the suspicion for years was that they would not.
Right. Okay, so be on the lookout for the Mission olives.
The Mission olive.
And these get how large? And,
You're looking at 15 to 20 feet.
okay, all right, good to know.
There is a variety called Arbacana that is also being used as production here. It is a smaller olive tree. And so if you have a less room in your yard, you can still do something that is a fruiting variety without the necessary space.
Okay, and if you have no space whatsoever, you can go to Little Ollie, which is
Exactly.
about as compact an olive as you could hope for.
Yeah, you're looking at, 3 to 5 feet. You can keep it pruned. It is evergreen. It's going to have the same drought, heat, deer resistance as the others, but it's not going to produce the fruit. So it's going to be
Ornamental
something that's
only.
going to, ornamental only, very low maintenance, evergreen.
Right, and beautiful plant.
Beautiful plant.
And this is something, you know, and of course a lot of people, why would you grow an olive? It doesn't have olives on it. Well, take a look at this.
The texture is,
yeah.
is stunning.
The color as well. I love that cool color, and you know, I just think it's a great addition to our plant palette. It goes so well with our native plants.
It is, and I think it's nice to be able to bring in something other than just rosemary as an evergreen backdrop that has a little bit different
Yeah,
shape to it.
there you go. Okay, the next olive we have is it's just called Mediterranean.
It's a regular Mediterranean olive. Basically, what you're looking at with those is they're landscape specimen.
Okay.
They're also non-fruiting, so if you're not wanting to have to deal with the cleanup,
Okay.
then you'd want to go with this if you're just looking for style and color and shape.
Okay, and that is something that people do need to be aware of with the fruiting varieties, is that you know, if you don't harvest them, you're going to have olive
Absolutely.
litter.
Absolutely.
Which, you know, some people can live with.
I don't mind.
The critters in the garden would certainly appreciate it,
That's
probably, right? But the Mediterranean olive, again, non-bearing, but very beautiful, and cold hardy as well.
Exactly.
So all the benefits we've talked about thus far.
Yeah, occasionally they'll get nipped, they'll get knocked down. If we have a very rare event, they could knock them close to the ground, but normally they will come right back up.
Okay, well, we've talked about the olives. Another hot plant right now are the pomegranates. And there are multiple different kinds of these. And I didn't know there was a distinction between dwarf pomegranates and compact, but you've brought a compact form. And again, extremely attractive little shrub.
It is, it is. It's got real tight leaves, the beautiful hot orange flowers in the summertime that you get with the standard pomegranates. It is going to produce a smaller fruit, a little bit astringent, really not something that you would put on your ice cream. But otherwise, it's just a stunning landscape specimen for tighter yards.
And I love the flowers on these as well. And pomegranates are tough as nails.
You can't kill them.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm seeing some that have been on homesteads for 100 years here in Texas through everything we could dish at them.
Yeah, they're extremely, extremely tough plants. And you can get some that are bearing that will produce a fruit that you can put on your ice cream. And the next one we're going to talk about is the most common one, in fact, in the U.S. right now.
The wonderful pomegranate, which is the one that you would buy in the grocery store at $2 or $3 a piece. You can actually grow it your own home, and it will produce enough to feed the neighborhood. Still beautiful orange flowers. It's got some deer resistance to it. Extremely drought tolerant, heat tolerant, and although it goes dormant in the wintertime, it has no problems.
Occasionally pomegranates get a little thorny. How does the wonderful do in that category?
You're still going to get a little bit, but I haven't noticed an abundance of thorns on them.
Yeah, well, and that's not such a bad thing. Keeps the deer at least cautious.
A little bit, yeah, exactly, exactly.
Right. So great plants, though. I love the pomegranates.
I do too.
And the next one we're going to talk about, maybe it's close to the top. It's certainly in the top 5 of my favorite native trees, and that's the Mexican persimmon. And you brought one in from your own yard that's bearing right now.
Yeah, the Mexican or Texas persimmon, native to our area. Loves the rocky soil, grows beautifully in it, can take full sun to part shade, so it works as an understory tree, produces green that turn to black persimmons. They are smaller, but they're edible. Not only for wildlife, but for us. High seed content, but they work really well with jams and jellies.
Yeah, and you actually were saying that you just sampled some recently.
I had one, yeah. I actually, this morning, I had a couple that were ripe on my tree, and so I went ahead and tasted them, and they just have a wonderful, smooth, sweet flavor. That you can just imagine on a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
And I have to say that just in terms of the form of this plant, you get that you get that beautiful bark, which is crepe myrtles like
very smooth, yes.
And the twisting branches that you can work with if you're one of those kind of pruning types, which I am. Just a phenomenal plant.
They're wonderful as a specimen in your yard. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, loquats are also very popular right now, and this is one that produces fruit in abundance.
It does.
And
in a
depends on
mild
the
year.
years.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the loquat tree is mostly evergreen. Of course, it will push out new leaves and drop its old ones, but it's rarely without foliage. In a mild winter, you will have an abundance of roughly quarter-size orange fruit, orange yellow fruit, that actually tastes like a cross between an apricot and a pear, or apricot and a plum. Very tasty.
Incredibly tasty.
They still have seeds, but very tasty.
Sometimes I didn't know. I've seen loquats sold as ornamental plants and for years and years and years, and didn't even think about the fruit.
Yeah.
And then I knew somebody from Mexico was walking with him through the neighborhood, and he saw that. It's like, oh,
yeah.
He called them níspero, which is the word they use for loquat in Mexico. He started gobbling them down and said, oh, I got to try that.
Exactly, and that's kind of how it came to me this year in the spring, as one of my customers had them just full in her yard, and I went home with a paper bag of them.
Right.
And they were just fantastic, and yet here again, you almost can't kill them. They've been grown here for years.
Yeah. Real briefly, got to mention figs as well. Just a standard, probably the easiest fruit to grow in Texas.
Oh, without question. As long as you have space and full sun, you need very little else.
Yeah.
And they will go. You want to do Alma Celeste, Brown Turkey, Texas Everbearing, Black Mission are some great varieties for this area.
Well, you just named them all in a hurry, and that's great. This one has a striking leaf form. They are, I think, ornamental in their own right.
Yes.
Just beware that they do grow to a certain scale.
That's right. They can hit 20 by 20 if they're given the opportunity.
Right. Well, and that's not a bad thing. Some people need those corners filled up, but anyway.
And occasionally our winters will knock them back and keep them in control.
All right. Well, Amanda, this has been awesome.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for sharing all this information with us and coming from It's About Time to do so. And
Absolutely.
coming up next is our friend Daphne.
Hi, I'm Daphne Richards, and this is Augie Doggy. Many of us are troubled by mammals that chew the bark of young trees. Connie asked us what to do about her young elm that a porcupine chewed. Will young trees recover? Unfortunately, the answer is maybe yes, maybe no. It all depends on the extent of the damage. The growing tissue, called the cambium, of young trees is located very close to the bark of the surface of the tree. So if it's damaged, the growing tissue most likely is too, and the plant cannot regrow this very important area. But if the damaged area is small, the tree will grow around it and create other connections from the roots to the growing tissue above. Eventually, the damaged area will be covered by new bark and will be less susceptible to secondary infestations of insects and diseases. Younger trees recover faster than older trees, and many times critters are more attracted to younger trees whose bark is more tender and less thick, so quite often the tree is able to recover. If you notice any damage, or if you know that you have critters living in your area, go ahead and protect your tree by enclosing it in a fence for a few years until it gets old enough and has thick enough bark to be less attractive to animals. Once the bark's thicker, the tender growing area is much farther from the surface, so even if you have damage, maybe from a deer rubbing his antlers on the tree, the cambium won't be damaged. You definitely don't want to use plastic or other materials to wrap the tree. Those will trap moisture next to the bark, creating a perfect environment for insects and diseases. Hardware cloth makes a very good fence. Place it around the tree very close so that critters can't sneak in, not directly touching the tree. Connie also asked if she should spray anything on the damaged area to protect it. No, that's not necessary. It won't keep animals away, and it will actually inhibit the plant's natural ability to heal itself. Our plant of the week is gray santolina. Santolina chemiciprisus, also known as lavender cotton, even though it's not related to lavender or to cotton. Fortunately, santolina is most commonly referred to by its common name and is almost never confused with other plants, so you won't need to learn how to spell or pronounce its mouthful of a Latin name. This lovely little evergreen or evergray ground cover is a cute little button of a plant that eventually spreads and covers the ground up to 2 feet wide. It usually stays short, only about 12 inches tall, but it may get as tall as 2 feet. It loves the heat and the sun and prefers very well-drained soil, requiring almost no water. In fact, like many desert-type plants, santolina will suffer greatly if overwatered. The leaves are very fragrant, making it resistant to deer, and during summer, it will produce a prolific amount of small, bright yellow flowers that will persist for a very long time. To do in your garden this week, consider planting some cool weather vegetables such as cabbage, broccoli, collards, or kohlrabi. Also, watch for black spot on roses so you can treat with fungicide before the problem gets out of control. We'd love to hear from you, so please visit klru.org/ctg to send us your questions and plants of the week from your garden.
Thanks, Daphne. Now let's check in John Dromgoole for Backyard Basics.
Welcome to Backyard Basics. A lot of gardeners out there, but a lot of them don't have a garden. A lot of folks would like to garden, and they don't have the space to do it outdoors, or it's too shady, but they do have a spot somewhere around the house that they can grow a little bit, and that leads us to container gardening. It's real easy, and if you've never done it, there are many types of pots. This one over here on the end is a clay pot that is a little expensive. Many of the commercial pots are kind of expensive, yet you can go to an antique store, you can go to a garage sale. There are many places that you'll be able to pick up alternative containers. And in reality, they're quite attractive. I like to use that type of container. Plus, it's recycling at its best. So it's real easy. You just need a nice container, anywhere from a 6-inch pot all the way up to a whiskey barrel. Or hanging baskets. Nice, large hanging basket. You can't beat that. Those are so pretty also. You can grow vegetables in them. You can grow some nice herbs in them. You know, it's pretty flexible. All you need is some good drainage out there. There are some new things on the market, though, for folks. For example, this right here is called a living wall. Made out of recycled material. It's kind of dark, so it disappears once it's on the wall. They can be hung up there in a series, one on top of the other, and then planted up. The backside prevents moisture from coming through, so the wall is in really good shape. It doesn't wet it or cause a lot of humidity. And one of the things that's nice about it is this right here. It's a wick, and this wick goes down inside of the container to the bottom, and so you pour your water when you're watering along the top, and it goes right down there to the root zone. Pretty neat, huh? So if all you have is a wall, then put your herbs in it and start growing that way. Another one of our options is the earth box. The earth box is a self-watering device, so if you go away for a couple of days, you're going to come back and find your vegetables or flowers in great shape. This is a plastic container right here. There are many sizes, some for tomatoes. I like this one for lettuce and other greens to grow in there. And the key is to have some really nice drainage. So you see these grommets right here provide good drainage for this. Drainage is really important. If you don't have good drainage and it rains for several days, chances are really good that you're going to lose your crop because it just stays too wet. A good potting soil, that's critical. You know, you can't grow pretty plants or vigorous plants if you have a poor growing medium. So a good compost, homemade, for example. You want to buy a commercial one? Okay, that's good, but if it doesn't have compost in it, go ahead and add a little bit of compost to some of those peat-based growing mediums. So, full sun, transplants or seeds, it really depends on the type of plant. A nice little screen over the drainage hole. This keeps the fire ants and other critters from getting into the little holes. I like this very much. I would encourage people to do this more often. A good fertilizer. These containers are limited in size, so they don't hold a lot of fertilizer. So a good liquid organic one or a granular, either one of those will work very well. I like the liquids. And watering is critical, so you can't let them just dry out. You need some kind of frequency with your watering. A saucer is always good because it'll stain the patio for sure. And so what you want to do is get the suitable plants, and there are many miniatures these days, grown in the right season. Contact your local extension agent. They will tell you what varieties are good in your area. Well, for Backyard Basics, I'm John Dromgoole. I'll see you next time.
Visit klru.org/CTG to find out more. Next week, see how to plant and the keyhole concept. Until then, I'll see you in the garden.
To learn about today's program, watch online and follow CTG's blog. Check out klru.org/CTG.
Support for Central Texas Gardener comes from GeoGrowers, offering custom soil blends for lawns, gardens, xeriscaping, and organic landscaping supplies. More information at geogrowers.net.